Well, after what seemed like endless deadline extensions and 3 prime ministers later, the United Kingdom and Europe have finally settled on a Brexit deal. European Union nations have backed the Brexit trade deal with the UK, meaning the new agreement will come into play on New Year's Day. So they're finally there. But already, UK businesses are being warned to prepare for a bumpy transition as they rush to figure out where they actually stand in a deal that was years in the making. And the question still stands, I guess, is this a victory for the Britons that voted for Brexit? Well, joining me now to discuss this is the editor at Spike magazine in the UK, Brendan O'Neill. Brendan, good to see you. Belated Merry Christmas.
You too, Michael.
You wrote recently in Spiked, is this the real thing? What have we compromised? And why would something as simple as Brexit, that is Britain restoring its sovereignty and democracy, take 2,000 pages of texts? Well, it's a good question. Is this the real thing?
I think it's the best thing that we can get at the moment. I mean, some people, including me, would never be satisfied unless we had a 100% clean break with the European Union. And the deal probably makes too many compromises on issues like fish and the fishing rights of European Union countries in British waters, and also on other issues like divergence. What happens if Britain diverges from the European Union? Will there be some form of punishment, some form of reprimand? So there are some things that raise concerns, but generally speaking, I think it's a great success for Boris. There are many people who said he would not get a deal, that it was not possible, and I think he's proven them wrong. So in the round, I think it's probably the best we can get in these circumstances, and I think the British government has got good reason to feel happy with what they've achieved.
Well, not just the British government, but I think ultimately it is a victory for the British public. The 52% that voted for Brexit, and for the last 4.5 years were put speed humps in the way of that natural transition by, as you would say, the establishment. There was a clear break in Britain, wasn't there, between what the majority of the voters wanted and what those in power that were benefiting from the current system wanted to hang on to, and people power prevailed.
Absolutely. I think that's been the story of the United Kingdom for the past 4.5 years, has been a civil war, essentially, a civil war without guns between sections of the establishment who wanted to stop Brexit and ordinary people, the majority of whom wanted Brexit to happen. This was the largest democratic vote in the history of this country, 17.4 million people. And politicians, the media elites, the legal elites, and various other people did everything they could to try to prevent that vote from being enacted, which was an alarming assault on our democratic rights. So it's a great victory for the voters of this country. We've proven that democracy is important and that our democratic voice must be heard. What's really shocking at the moment is that there are still some people out there are still some Ramonas who want to prevent this trade deal from going through. They're genuinely still shocked that Brexit is actually going to happen. They thought they had the right and the authority to overturn the largest vote in the history of this country. So that's quite shocking, and I think we still have to have a reckoning with those sections of the establishment that try to prevent our votes from being enacted.
Well, I think you're quite right. And what strikes me as particularly ironic about the Ramonas, as you beautifully call them, is that they're often the very same people that have been decrying the Trump campaign's attempt to legally challenge the vote in America, saying, oh, this threatens America's democracy, thus it threatens the world's democracy. And yet, for 4.5 years, through the courts, through every avenue, they've done exactly the same thing with Brexit.
Absolutely right. And in fact, they've been far worse than anything that Trump and his supporters have done. You know, lots of these kind of posh British liberals are currently going crazy about Trump, saying that he is a great danger to democracy. They're such complete hypocrites because they spent 4.5 years doing far worse things to a democratic vote here in the UK. Correct. They did everything they could to try to prevent it from being enacted. So there's an enormous amount of hypocrisy in their criticisms of Trump.
And for people in Australia, we are in many respects geographically a long way removed, obviously, from Brexit, although many of us have kept a close eye on it because family are there and all the rest of it. But it's important to note this is a victory for Britain against the EU because countries, as you've mentioned, the French, the Dutch, the Irish, the Greeks, over the years they've voted against austerity measures, all sorts of agreements that the EU have tried to foist on them, treaties and constitutions. And their will has either been ignored or they've been told to go back to the ballot box and vote until they get it, quote unquote, right. Well, the British pushed it back against all of that and ultimately prevailed. It's an enormous achievement.
That's a really important point. The British are the first people in the European Union, in the history of the European Union, to successfully vote against the European Union. As you say, every other time that European people have voted against the EU, they've either been ignored or they've been forced to vote again and again until they give the supposedly right answer. That's what happened to the Irish when they voted against the Nice Treaty and the Lisbon Treaty. That's what happened to the Dutch and the French when they voted against the European Constitution. And that's what happened to the Greeks when they voted against an EU austerity package. They all ended up with those things anyway. So that's how the EU operates. It is a deeply, deeply anti-democratic oligarchy which has nothing but contempt for the views of people across Europe. What the British have done very successfully is not only voted against the European Union, but ensured that that vote was actually carried through. That's what is so alarming to the EU. Someone has finally won against the European Union, and they're very worried about the signal that will send to Eurosceptic people across the continent. I actually think they're right to be worried about that, because what Britain has shown is that it's possible to leave the European Union. It's possible to be a democratic nation rather than being beholden to this neoliberal, anti-democratic oligarchy.
Of course, there are now tensions within Britain, though. You've got the Scottish under the SNP. They want to be sovereign, as it were, from the United Kingdom. They want to go alone. I mean, just roughly looking at the mathematics, though, it would be impossible, wouldn't it, for Scotland to be a sovereign nation, to defend itself, have its own currency, be vibrant and viable. I mean, they are heavily indebted to the South, aren't they, in the sense that England props them up?
Yeah, this is the great irony of the Scottish independence movement, is they claim they want independence, but actually they just want to go scurrying back to the European Union, which would completely undermine their independence. So it's a bit of a shallow movement. The point that Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, she constantly says Scottish people voted against Brexit, they voted Remain, and that means that they are currently being betrayed. That is completely and utterly dishonest. This was a nationwide referendum in 2016. All 4 countries of the United Kingdom took part to decide the fate of the United Kingdom. So all those votes in Scotland must count like everyone else's, and the country as a whole, the United Kingdom, voted for Brexit. So she is behaving in an anti-democratic way when she wants to cut Scotland off just because she doesn't like the nationwide result of the 2016 referendum.
It'd be about as silly as the local authorities in Chelsea or Westmoreland saying, "Oh well, we voted to remain, so we want to stay in." Now, let me ask you, whilst we're talking about the UK, Meghan and Harry, their star has sort of fallen out of the constellation of grace the last 12 months, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and I'm pretty glad that it has. I think Harry and Meghan are an embarrassment to the UK, if I'm being honest. I kind of feel sorry for Harry. He's been sucked into the religion of wokeness. I mean, he has said some crazy things this year. He talks about, he really is now beholden to the ideology of critical race theory. He wants white people to self-flagellate, essentially, for the sins of history. He's also a crazy environmentalist now. He made a comment earlier in the year in which he said that perhaps COVID-19 is Mother Nature's way of telling us to check our bad behavior, and Mother Nature has sent us to our room to make us try to understand how destructive we have been as a species.
She's giving us 6 of the best, isn't she?
Yeah, well, he is, he's saying some pretty odd things, and I think he's been sucked into that world of wokeness, that world of celebrity virtue signaling, and a lot of people in the UK feel that this couple have abandoned Britain, abandoned their duties, and are now going around the world lecturing people in a way that is really kind of inappropriate. So they're not particularly popular in the UK. It'll be interesting to see what happens with them next.
Meanwhile, his grandmother, the Queen, powers on, and good on her. Before you go, you wrote in November, just on the cusp of the US election, "If Biden wins, we all lose." That was the headline. Now, it seems as though he's won. Are we all going to lose?
I think possibly, yes, sadly. I think what the victory of Biden will do, Biden and Harris, I think she's problematic on this front too. I think it will embolden the most regressive forces around the world, the kind of woke forces, political correctness, the technocrats who want to push back against populism and get everything back to the status quo as it existed previously. All those forces, I think, will be emboldened by Biden in the White House. So I think it's going to have a detrimental global impact. But on the positive side, there are millions of people in the UK who still want Brexit. there are more than 70 million people in America who voted for Trump, who voted for a different kind of politics. So those people are still out there, and I don't think they're going to be very easily silenced.
In fact, the number grew between 2016 and the election in 2020, which is rather extraordinary because I can't think of a time in history where a sitting president has increased his vote and lost.
Well, that's right. And what's most striking about the increase of Trump's vote is that for 4 years, the establishment across the West essentially told us he was the most evil man who ever existed. He was the new Hitler. Only a racist could support him. And then in the presidential election this year, his vote grew. It grew among Native Americans, Latinos, some black men, more black men voted for him this time around. And of course, many, many working class whites as well. So these people are forming a kind of populist alliance. They're ignoring the hysteria of the woke elites and the East Coast elites in the US, and they are thinking for themselves. So I think that's quite a positive story of this year, the way in which voters are capable of making up their own minds.
Well, in what's been a pretty bleak year, we need to look for the positives. It's always positive talking with you and to pick your brain. Thank you, Brendan. Happy New Year.
Thanks, Michael.